The Bible is full of images expressing themes that run right through the whole narrative. We need to examine each of these images closely. We need to see how they all connect us to the larger story. We need to read the images. At the beginning of the Bible, in the story of creation in Genesis 1, it says that God puts into the world that he is making, plants that have seed which will enable them to reproduce and multiply. It says, God says, let the earth put forth vegetation, plants yielding seed, fruit trees of every kind on earth that bear fruit with the seed in it. And it was so. And then the author can't get enough of the theme. He says the earth brought forth vegetation, plants yielding seed, and trees of every kind bearing fruit with the seed. And God saw that it was good. When Genesis stresses something like this, it's because it's important that the sort of creation that God is making is a creation which has the seeds of its own multiplicity within it. That's how God wants to work in the world. God gives to his world the principle of ongoing life. And it's the same when God commands the humans to be fruitful and multiply, and indeed the other animals to be fruitful and multiply, putting within the world creatures who have this capacity to multiply, to become abundant, to fill his world, to fill his project, his heaven plus earth creation. There's a principle of ongoing life which God has put into the world. So often in the modern Western world, we have imagined God or heaven a long way away and earth and humans down here somewhere, so that if God is going to do anything, it'll be because God just zaps the world in a quick one-off and then goes away again. That's the wrong model. That comes from maybe 18th century deism or Neo-Epicureanism. The world is a long way away. How is God going to do stuff? But Genesis gives an answer to that God has made the world in such a way as fresh things will happen from within. God is at work in the world, and the principle of the seed is one of the key ways in which that happens. Now, as this works out through the story of the Bible, it comes up in surprising ways, and often we today don't notice this because our translations don't necessarily alert us to it. But when God makes his covenant with Abraham in Genesis 15, with Abram, he's going to be called Abraham a little later, but with Abram, he says, look up to heaven and count the stars if you can. And then he says, so shall your descendants be. But the word for descendants there is the same word as the word seed, zerak, in Hebrew, and in the Septuagint translation, the Greek, sperma. And so descendants in Genesis, or family sometimes, is also another translation that we find. In Genesis 22, after Abraham has been prepared to offer his own son Isaac as a sacrifice, God says, because you have done this, I will bless you and make your offspring as numerous as the stars of heaven. But the word for offspring is the same word, seed. And then Genesis 22:18, by your offspring, your seed, shall all the nations of the earth gain blessing for themselves, because you have obeyed my voice. So what we find in Genesis 15 and 22 is that God is doing the new creation which seemed to have been put into abeyance by human sin. God calls Abraham and his family to undo the sin of Adam and its consequences. That's one of the fundamental principles of reading the Old Testament and actually on into the New as it retrieves the stories of both Adam and Abraham. So that Abraham's family is to be the people of the seed, the descendants, the ones through whose ongoing family life God will do the new thing, which is going to address the problem of Adam, and through addressing the problem of Adam, will address the problem of all creation. The promises to Abraham then come into a new sort of focus with the call of David. King David seems an unlikely choice to begin with. He was unlikely when Samuel came to Jesse's house in Bethlehem looking for the one who was to be the Lord's anointed after Saul had proved by his disobedience that he was unfit to be king. And David happened to be out in the fields keeping sheep, but Samuel says, bring him in, and then he anoints him as the future, the once and coming king. And so David becomes king. But when David is settled and has established himself in his kingdom, David wants to build a house for the Lord. He wants to build a permanent dwelling place for God. This ties in, of course, with the whole theme of the temple and new creation, which we've already talked about. But in 2 Samuel 7, Nathan the prophet comes to David and says, well, that wasn't a bad idea that you should build a house for the Lord, but actually you're the wrong person to do that. You've got too much blood on your hands. You've been too much a man of violence. I'm going to raise up your seed after you, who will sit on your throne. This is going to be Solomon, and he will build me a house, but I will be his father, and he will be my son. And most translations don't say, I will raise up your seed, because that's not how we talk about sons or descendants in much contemporary English. But that's the phrase, and it's picked up in the New Testament explicitly, that Jesus comes of the seed of David according to the flesh. Romans 1:3, Paul's crucial early summary in Romans of the gospel message of Jesus, son of David, son of God, Lord of the world. And so when God says through the prophet Nathan to David, I will raise up your seed, the early Christians looked at that passage and they saw in it a prophecy not just of a line of descendants, but of resurrection. I don't think anyone before Jesus had read that text in that way, 2 Samuel 7 verse 12. But once Jesus had been raised from the dead, the Jesus who they had hoped was going to be the Davidic Messiah, then that text, as it were, sprang to new life. I will resurrect your seed. And they hail Jesus as the true seed of David. But along with the Davidic extension, as it were, of the Abrahamic promise, goes the worldwide extension, because in Psalm 2, the psalmist has God saying to David, ask of me and I will give you the nations for your inheritance, the uttermost parts of the earth for your possession. He's using Abrahamic language, which was originally about the promised land and about Abraham's seed dwelling in the promised land, to describe David's domain, that is the coming ultimate messianic kingdom of the Lord's anointed, as being the whole wide world. What is said of Abraham and the land is said of David and the world. And so we find promises about the seed. We find in Isaiah 40 and 55, the grass withers, the flower fades, but the word of our God will stand forever. That's Isaiah 40, picked up at the end of the great poem in Isaiah 55. That as the rain and the snow come down from heaven and don't return but water the earth, so shall my word be that goes forth from my mouth. It will accomplish my purpose. And he says, because I am the God who gives seed to the sower and bread to the eater. And I am the one who will make this land flourish and abound. It will multiply. It will be abundant again. This is the promise of new creation through the seed, which is the word. So shall my word be. It will do this work. And that's precisely what Jesus picks up in his parables. Before we get there, though, we see in the exilic and post-exilic literature of ancient Israel this sense that the remnant of the Judeans who return from Babylon to Judea, they are seen as the holy seed. That's how they would read Isaiah 6:13. When the tree has been cut down and burned, then the holy seed will be its stump, the remnant. But the holy seed themselves are corrupt, according to the prayer in Ezra chapter 9. The holy seed have gone astray. They have corrupted themselves. Even though you brought us back from exile, we are still in a mess. But they're using this word seed, as it were, almost as a carrier of the promise. We are Abraham's seed. Sometime you will send us David's true seed. So please, they pray, please do it. Please forgive us. Please take forward your purposes. And the early church, telling the story of Jesus, tells the story of Jesus as the seed of Abraham, the seed of David, the one who was to come. And so, as I said, Jesus announces the kingdom, and the very first parable framed as such in Matthew, Mark, and Luke is the parable of the sower who goes about sowing seed. And the seed is the word. These are the echoes of Isaiah, and Isaiah himself echoing all the way back to Genesis. This, in other words, is new creation. Of course, it's a puzzle because Jesus' challenge is that's what God is doing right here and now. God is sowing his people again. God is doing the new covenant, the new creation that he always promised. But much of that seed seems to be going to waste. People don't want it. They don't want Jesus' message. They hear and they hear, but they don't understand. They don't get it. They turn away. And so the promise of the seed is that there will be great fruitfulness, great multiplication, great abundance. And Jesus symbolizes that in his feeding miracles, when he feeds large crowds with what start off as just tiny little scraps of food. These are not like the temptation when Jesus was tempted to turn stones into bread. No, these are Jesus taking bread and making more of it. As C.S. Lewis says in his book Miracles, this has the messianic style about it. This is God doing creation, taking what is there already and multiplying it and making it be more fruitful and so on. And so we find then in Paul's theology, Jesus as the true seed, but because Jesus is the Messiah, the seed of David, then all those who are in him become the seed which is the true remnant, which is now going to multiply and grow. It won't be a little remnant getting whittled down to nothing. It'll be a new remnant starting off the whole new worldwide proposal. Because in Galatians chapter 3, Paul uses this image of the seed in exactly this way, that God's purpose when he called Abraham was to give him a single seed, but it was a seed which would be a family consisting of Jews and Gentiles alike. So Galatians 3:29 says, if you are the Messiahs, if you belong to Jesus the Messiah, then you are Abraham's seed, heirs according to promise. And again, the translations don't always bring that out. We find the same in Romans 4, and Paul develops it elsewhere. So the idea of the seed starting off apparently innocently without much resonance in Genesis 1 is in fact a major carrier of the themes of creation and new creation, and a major pointer to the fact that the Creator God has done the new creation in Jesus and is continuing to do it, blessing and multiplying and giving abundance wherever the gospel reaches. Please feel free to click the link to watch the next video in this sequence.